How's it going, fantasy players, and happy Friday. For today's video, we've got ourselves another late week mock draft, but we're not going to waste any time before we get started. So head down and give this video a quick like. Let's hit that intro and let's get cracking. Here we go, another week, another new draft position. So let's kick this thing off and let's get started. CMC, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara. Wow, 5 running backs in a row. Tyreek Hill off the board, and then Devontae Adams here, leading into our 8th overall selection here to start off the first round of this draft. Some immediate things I like and see on the board here, and I apologize. I'm not sure if you're getting some feedback or extra audio right now, but there are very loud planes flying over my house. So if you can hear that, I'm sorry. I guess I'll see you when I edit this video, but nonetheless. So I like a couple options here. Immediately, Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb jump off the screen. Stephon Diggs is a good option here, but this is a player that, you know, could potentially swing back to me at the top, or I guess it would be really the middle of the second round here. I think Stephon Diggs is a bit underrated in mock drafts right now, and be it this is a full PPR mock draft here. So this is what the ADP is telling us, though. This is how the draft board is reflecting. So I'll take a second. I've made my choice. I know the pick I want to make here. So since the top 2 wide receivers are already off the board, with that being Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams, obviously, I think I'm going to end up going with Nick Chubb here. And if you've watched a couple of the videos in the past couple weeks here, I've been doing a lot of talk and a lot of analysis on the running back position for 2021 fantasy football. And one of the takeaways is that Nick Chubb is an incredibly safe choice. And if he falls to you, there's a lot of value. I always say this, you cannot win your fantasy leagues with your first round draft pick the majority of the time. However, I was talking about Saquon Barkley as a league winning player at this spot on the board. And he ends up going second here. So something we haven't been seeing, maybe a little bit of a trend here where Saquon Barkley is starting to heat back up in the fantasy market. But nonetheless, Nick Chubb along with Derrick Henry in 2020. And Nick Chubb, missing 4 games, was second in explosive rushes. That's rushes of 20 or more yards on a given touch. So he had 12 of those. Derrick Henry had 16. That's crazy numbers. And we talk about these players as individuals who don't catch passes, and they're not very involved in the receiving game. They don't have much work in that phase of the game. That's really important because we want dynamic fantasy players that can do damage in a lot of ways. That's not how these guys get their value, but they are able to add value in open space. They're incredibly hard to bring down in the open field. They're both crazy explosive, as you can tell with those explosive plays being as high as they are. And they're players that are now dependable because they have that in their games. Other players I tend to bash on because they lack this trait. Josh Jacobs is one of the names up there that frequently I talk about as a player who I would love if he was able to add some extra value per touch, but he's just not able to get it done on a per snap basis, and that's ultimately what ended up smushing his fantasy value last season and leaving a lot of teams kind of wanting more. So Nick Chubb was our first selection here. We went running back. I tend to like a balanced approach style. So by the way, if you are new around here to the channel, you need to go down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on, because I'm actually going to be coming out with the video next week where I break down my current top strategies for 2021 fantasy leagues that I think give you the best situation in the first in the early rounds here to go out there and win those leagues. There's a lot of ways you can go about it, but I think some are a little bit more foolproof than others. There's certainly a handful of things that you can do. You can target your board a variety of different ways. You can attack it from a lot of different angles. And at the end of the day, there's situations where if you make the right draft picks, and even if you mess up the draft, if you recover in the waiver wire periods, if you go out in the trade market, and by the way, another reason to subscribe here, some of the best content I do is on a week-to-week basis. I'll do trade targets videos where I talk about week 7 trade targets, buy low and sell high candidates. Guys that you should be looking for to go out and buy low for on your team at a discounted price, or guys that I think that are going to come back down to earth and crash, and if you've got them on your roster, you might want to move off of them for a better option, because in fantasy football, unlike real life, the grass is usually greener on the other side if we are to bail early enough. So before I ramble a bit too much, I need to make a pick here. So Travis Kelce, a pick I love making on the back end of the first round. He's actually creeping up higher on draft boards now. Zeke Elliott, Aaron Jones falling down the list a bit here. There are two names I see at the top that I really like, that being A.J. Brown and Cam Akers. And Cam Akers I've talked about as a league-winning running back, potential to be the RB1 overall. I've talked about him. If you want to look at his talent and his skill set, he's a mesh to me of Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook. I see the smooth running, the kind of wiggling through the offensive line and getting through holes of the Aaron Jones. And then when he hits the sideline and gets upfield, he's got such a quick twitch to him and this just lightning fast twitch ability that you see out of Dalvin Cook that's just crazy to watch. So Cam Akers in that offense is going to be a massive issue for defenses next year. This dude, like I said, could be the RB1 if everything goes his way next year. Watch out, because Cam Akers is in for a big season, and that's ultimately going to be my pick here. But I want to talk about A.J. Brown quick as well for a second. A.J. Brown was in line to be a top 3 or 4 wide receiver for me in fantasy this year because there was literally no competition for targets. Now, obviously, Julio Jones is a Tennessee Titan, so we're looking at that, and I apologize. I'm just now realizing that my roster wasn't up on my screen there for you. And here comes the airplane again, if you can hear that. What was I saying? Oh, so Julio Jones is a Titan now. That's going to completely level out the playing field back to roughly we can expect what happened last year, because I don't think people realize how much consideration and volume Ryan Tannehill was giving to Corey Davis. A.J. Brown was, and they were both very productive receivers, but A.J. Brown was more efficient. He scored more in the red zone. He was a better fantasy player, right? Corey Davis was still hogging a lot of the opportunity there. Even if we see the same case scenario for the Titans with Julio on the field, A.J. Brown is perfectly fine there as you see him at the 2-7, but he's not quite a top 5 fantasy wide receiver anymore. I have him just outside of that. If you want to go check out my recent video, I actually just, I believe it was 2 days ago, posted my wide receiver rankings here in June for the 2021 season, and I ended up putting AJ at, I believe it was number 7 overall. So top 12 receivers if you want to check that video out. Here in the third round, it's looking like we need to start considering to do a receiver pickup, but it's not something we have to do. What I really like about fantasy is knowing what situation I should put myself in and how I should attack the board based on the way it falls to me. Please, if you can take away one message from this mock draft, and all mock drafts are going to give you a different scenario. All mock drafts, so honestly, all the better. Go out there and mock draft, practice, see what happens from different draft picks when different players fall to you. Because the best thing you can do is prepare yourself for how you're going to quickly pivot when you're on a clock and you have to make a split decision that'll impact the rest of your fantasy year based off of it. You can't ultimately win your entire league based off of the decisions you make on draft day, because you still got to have the right lineup players set. You got to make waiver wire moves. You can't just sit pretty once the draft day is over. You got to be active with your fantasy teams. That's how you ultimately take home the end prize, and that's what I love to do with you on the channel here. Is you stick around, we talk, we do question and answers, and we have a lot of interactive ways to get help and advice, and as a group come together and figure out what the best situation is for fantasy lineups. So super great community to be a part. I want to keep this thing growing and get this whole SFS brand put together and grow stronger. So if you want to be a part of that, if that's something that sounds cool to you, make sure to go click that subscribe button again. But we need to make a pick here. So I rambled again. That's all right. We still got time. I'm loving Keenan Allen here. Again, go watch that wide receiver rankings video. He's going to be a target monster. This was a player who actually had more targets than Devontae Adams for the majority of the season, but Keenan Allen went down at the end of the year. Nonetheless, was still up there with Allen Robinson, who's still on the board. Another name I really, really like. Another name I did consider is Naji Harris. That's a pick I think that could have paid very good dividends at this spot, and maybe he puts up RB1 numbers at the end of the season. But I think sometimes going RB with your first 3 picks can burn you a little bit and limit your upside. Last year, that's something I tended to do on draft day, and I had to make a lot of trades. I had to pivot out of that because one of my favorite draft investments was Miles Sanders, and I had to bail on that wagon really quick. Not saying Miles can't be good this year. Not saying that I don't like Miles Sanders, because I think he's got a pretty electric skill set, but the injury kind of derailed him, and honestly, his team situation was the worst factor of it all, and it just melted in front of him. So Allen had roughly 150 targets last season, and when you look at Justin Herbert, a player who's going to progress here in year 2, the sky's the limit for him. He's not a flashy pick. He's not a guy that's going to give you insane upside week to week. But what he does give you is really, really good, consistent play. And for a player who's not a massive threat in the receiving game, in the sense that he's not like a jump ball player, this is a technician, a route runner. Keenan Allen still finds ways to score touchdowns. So I love a lot of facets of his game here. I think he can be a really productive player in certain spots, and especially when he has that good of quarterback talent in front of him. So anyways, my one message that I want to get home to you is that do not walk into draft day with one set strategy that you're going to go into the draft and ultimately stick with the whole time. Be prepared to pivot. Something's going to change. Someone will make a pick you're not expecting. Even if you're the first draft pick on the board, you got to know how to answer when it comes to you at the 2-12 and 3-1, because you're ultimately not going to touch the board again for 23 picks. So you just have to know how not every situation. You don't have to be crazy prepared if fantasy isn't your thing. But I would assume that since you're watching this video, you're probably at least interested enough to learn more and want to make your teams as good as possible. So that's my advice to you. Keep watching these mock draft videos that I put out once a week. At bare minimum, I will be putting out multiple mocks a week once we get into August and such, as draft season's rapidly approaching. But get informed. Go mock draft on your own. We'll have subscriber mocks here on the channel where you can join those up live in mock draft with me, and I'll give you some feedback. So Keenan Allen's the pick. I got 45 seconds to make another decision. David Montgomery here. This is a workhorse running back. Plays in a really easy division in terms of opposing run defenses. Terry McLaurin, super high upside receiver. I think his floor is a bit shaky because of Fitzmagic and the streaky play he has there. Let's check some other names really quick at the running back position. I think I might go David Montgomery here as a value play because I'm not sure the rest of these running backs are really going to give me the production I want them to later on in the draft. There's still a lot of receivers I can take here, a lot of guys who I see giving me similar production. So that's going to be the move here. It's not something I love doing, but David Montgomery was one of my must-draft players at his current ADP. You're talking about a player who might see 20-plus touches on a per-game basis. That's not just rushing attempts. That's including the receiving volume he gets. But how is a player who gets that much attempts and that much work going in the middle of the fourth round? I don't understand that. Let's look at some other running backs here. He should absolutely be going before a Josh Jacobs. Montgomery not only is a very effective runner and has not a crazy amount of explosive plays, but he does have more than Josh Jacobs. He also uses that receiving game. And this is an offense I think is trending upwards. That line is getting better. They drafted Tevin Jenkins in the second round last year. Well, this past spring, I guess you would say. Josh Jacobs had to cut his entire offensive line with a clean slate. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, wildly talented. I love him as a dream scenario for what he could be. I think he could take over the nickname I've placed on Austin Eckler as Mini McCaffrey, and he could be Mini McCaffrey, but they just don't use him enough. He doesn't get enough volume. I think that even a David Montgomery might be a safer draft pick than a Miles Sanders. Maybe he doesn't have quite the upside of a Sanders, but we're talking about players here who could have a big impact on your team. This one's atrocious to me. Travis Etienne should not be going before David Montgomery. Najee Harris, you can justify that because he's got a safe enough floor. He'll get volume. He is the clear-cut one in that backfield. James Robinson is sounding like he's going to be the team's number one threat, and then Carlos Hyde is going to be the second punch in that rotation. So Etienne's going to be used as a gadget pick and a skill player and an offensive weapon more so than an actual running back. So I don't like that at all. People need to come back down to earth a little bit with him. So, with that being said, we've got our 5th round pick here, and we don't want to run out of time because that's a frequent issue we have here on the channel, especially in these mock draft videos. So, 2 players I love at the tight end position are both available. Mark Andrews is a guy who I think is probably the best pass-catching threat today on the Baltimore Ravens offense. Rashad Bateman is a player I really like down the road here, but I don't know if we can depend on him early on in his career as a rookie. Maybe by midseason, he'll break out. I think he will have big things in front of him throughout the course of his career, and honestly, he could be a league winner down the stretch this year, but it's the 5th round. It's too early. Maybe we come back and pick him later. TJ Hawkinson, though, 16 picks later in the ADP. That's kind of a player I'm going to keep my eye on here. That is a crazy high upside pick for a player who is on a team that literally does not have any other established talent at the wide receiver position. We're looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown, Quintez Cephas, Rashad Bateman, and Tyrell Williams. So the gate is wide open for a top 3 fantasy tight end season for TJ Hawkinson, excuse me. So I need to make a pick because on cue, when I said I was going to do something, I talk and talk and talk and get myself in an ugly situation. So this is a tough pick, but I'm going to go Tyler Lockett here. Again, not a pick I'm overly enthused about. And maybe if I wasn't, I should really, in my next mock draft video, I should extend the clock I give myself because I'm really limiting what I can do. Let's check out running backs really quick here. I want to actually get a feel for the draft board. I should be doing this as I talk, but when I talk, I like to focus in on that. So I can give you the best content available that I have to offer. So I took Tyler Lockett here. This is a player who has kind of receded back down to that wide receiver 2 role with the Seahawks, yet he is an extremely high upside play at that. So I've got the safe floor play in Keenan Allen at that wide receiver 1 spot. 2 rounds later, we come back and take Tyler Lockett. A little bit more inconsistent, a little bit more boom bust. Actually, I would argue he's a lot more inconsistent and a lot more boom bust. And something I love around here on the SFS channel is consistency. But at this spot, the other players I was comparing him to, Juju is even worse. OBJ is even worse. CeeDee Lamb, I would pick in a heartbeat over Tyler Lockett if you can even just axe one of the other 2 guys in that situation out of there. They passed a crazy high amount last year, and I know Dak's coming back. I know it's going to be a better situation. I really thought about it. I really did. But I think at the end of the day, we're looking at a similar situation here with 2 players who are really high upside, not so great of a floor. So I think it fits well for our team to have taken either of those 2 players at this spot. And once again, if you can hear that, that is the sound of airplanes above my house as I'm recording this video. So there's a chance that you can't hear that at all, and it's just really loud to me in the house here, and you watch this video and wonder what the heck is going on. So if someone could tell me in the chat, yes, I heard the airplanes, that would make me feel better about myself. So, all right, here we got to make a pick, and I'm actually going to do this in record-setting pace here. I'm going to verify that there's no players left on the board. Hawkinson is a really, really strong consideration here. Valued right below the current draft pick we're at. I was going to take Ayuk, but then I looked back. Mark Andrews went at the top of the very bottom of the 5th, I should say. TJ Hawkinson here in the middle of the 6th round. This might be the perfect time to take advantage of this. The fact that Kyle Pitts, and I know he's uber talented and he's in a good spot right now. Julio Jones has moved, so he has increased opportunity in Atlanta. It's crazy that he's going already in the 4th round, but that's what we're seeing right now. That's the reality of the situation. I like the idea, again, of a Devontae Smith. I don't know if I'd take him ahead of Brandon Ayuk because I think Ayuk is a really strong player. And look at that, right down to 20 seconds. As I said, I was going to make a record-setting time pick here. Regardless, I really like Ayuk's situation as well with San Francisco, the usage he gets there, but I got to go TJ Hawkinson. So as I touched on earlier, that's something I wanted to keep my eye on here. This is probably a bona fide top 5 or 6 tight end play at his floor. I don't see a reality where, unless he gets injured, that he doesn't see a major spike in targets from what he got in 2020 because there's just no one else there. At least they had Marvin Jones last season. At least they had Kenny Golladay for a couple games. They don't have any of that anymore. They're going to be losing. They're going to have to throw the ball. Hawkinson will be close enough to the line of scrimmage that Jared Goff will feel comfortable checking down to him. And I'm not saying he's going to be Travis Kelce, but in the middle of the 6th round, that's crazy value. Like, you got to set yourself apart at some spot on your fantasy roster, and I think we can still find really good depth at the receiver position. I really, really like how the running back spot's coming together, but there's plenty of time to address wide receiver, which is probably our weakest unit right now. Nonetheless, I do need to go out there and take a quarterback, but with Jalen Hurts, someone with that much rushing upside on the board still, I don't feel any pressure to do so. Ryan Tannehill, another really good sleeper quarterback pick. He just added Julio Jones, so his ADP might even rise here, and we might see a spike in that category. I like a Chase Claypool who's on the board. I need to look at that receiver position, like I said. Jerry Judy, another player who is just on my 2021 breakout players list where I did 2 players, TJ Hawkinson also featured in that video, 2 players at every major fantasy position that are primed for a big breakout year. Jerry Judy saw 113 targets, I believe it was, in 2020. He only caught like 53 balls. So less than half of the passes thrown to him were actually completed receptions. That's crazy for a player of his talent. And it's rumored that he's got a really strong connection with Teddy B at training camp, or whatever we're at, mini camp right now. So I think that he'll ultimately come back, even with Sutton on the field, see a handful of targets, increase that catch percentage, and increase his overall production by doing so. This is a player who's too talented to not produce in fantasy football. If you want to talk about a guy like Devontae Adams, who was an uber good route runner and was the wide receiver 1 last season, he couldn't catch a ball to save his life when he came into the National Football League, and that's one of the main concerns for players right now surrounding Jerry Judy. So I like him and Claypool a lot. I think Chase Claypool's got the X wide receiver build. He's got that chance to be that red zone target for Big Ben inside the 20-yard line next year. We've seen him break out and make those explosive plays and do a lot after the catch. So I like that pick a lot as well. Remember, this is a full PPR league. And both of these are kind of crowded wide receiver rooms, if we're being honest. I mean, Deontay Johnson saw a crazy amount of targets last year. I think that Jerry Judy might see a little downtick with Sutton returning, but he is coming into year 2, so maybe more opportunity for production there. Deontay Johnson right here, the safer floor pick of them, I would say. But let's take a little swing here. Let's go with, this is a tough choice. At the end of the day, I like the touchdown upside that Chase Claypool gives me, and while I significantly doubt Big Ben Roethlisberger late season, maybe Claypool puts up monster numbers in the first half of the year, and I use him as trade bait, and I use him as ammo to get out of there and go get a guy who I actually trust on the stretch. So there's always multiple strategies here. There's always a plan A and a plan B with all these picks. You got to have room to pivot, like I said, and be able to quickly move off players. One of the worst things you can do in fantasy football is get attached and draft players that you love just because you really like them as who they are. It's so fun to pick the players that you're the biggest fan of, but when they let you down, it stings all the more. I picked Zach Ertz in fantasy football 3 seasons in a row when I was a kid because I just really liked him, and I thought that, he was such a good tight end one year, he might as well lead me to the fantasy playoffs the next year. And so I ended up just having him hang around my Dynasty team for too long, and once there was definitely red flags and warning signs that his volume was going to decline 2 years in a row, I got off of him the year before last year's massive debacle and letdown. But nonetheless, don't play fantasy football with any emotion. You gotta look at these players like their actual GMs look at them. And that's kind of unfortunate to say, but even in a dynasty league, you gotta move off of a player a year before it's too late. Otherwise, you're gonna be losing that value. You can always get rookie picks, different draft capital, and investments to come back and make those picks come around for you and be productive pieces. So a sleeper I really like here is Brandon Cooks. I've been checking out the different position groups. Michael Carter might be an interesting pick here. I doubt he'll be back on the bend when we come back to our second pick, but I've already got 3 strong running backs. I think I should invest in a 4th, though. A lot of talk has been coming out of Jets camp that it won't be long until Michael Carter takes over that job. And I've been talking about how I think it's crazy right now that Tevin Coleman, who is currently the team's starter, isn't actually being picked in fantasy before the 3rd string back, who is actually Michael Carter. Michael Carter might eventually take this backfield over, but it seems a bit skewed that he would be going ahead of someone who's 2 spots higher than him on the depth chart. He's a smaller back. He's shifty. He's got a nice upside because he can get lost in the line, make explosive plays in the open field, catch passes out of the backfield. But Tevin Coleman's not a scrub. The main thing he deals with is injuries. Maybe at this point he's got some talent limitations or some physical limitations because of injuries and whatnot holding him back. But I really like this Brandon Cooks pick. I do have Trey Sermon on the board as a backup and a bail option if I get stuck there. I don't know. I think I'm going to regret it if I don't end up getting Trey Sermon or Michael Carter. So I'll pull the trigger on Michael Carter. I've already got 3 running backs ahead of him. So this is the perfect situation where I let Michael Carter sit Wait on him, wait on him. The trend in fantasy is that coaches over the last couple of years have been waiting till the back stretch of the season, and there we go. So if I had waited, I would have been without Michael Carter and Trey Sermon most likely, because Sermon goes the pick before me. So it's probably a smart choice that I did that. Again, pivoted off my draft strategy, although I saw another name I liked on the board a lot, that being, where is he at? Brandon Cooks here at the 8-11, playing for a terrible team that's going to be throwing the ball a ton next season. I went out there and got my running back because maybe one of my backs goes down. This is a 2-flex league, so in theory I could start 4 wide receivers if I wanted to, maybe 2 tight ends instead. That's an unlikely strategy, but something that could happen. I go out here and I get myself some depth that'll pay back its value when I need it the most in the fantasy playoffs. Coaches, for example, Cam Akers, Miles Sanders, Jonathan Taylor, they all broke out in the back half of the season. And while JT was the starter for week 2 and on, I mean, he struggled, and he wasn't very good in the middle of the season last year. People forget that it was how crazy hot he ended the season that drove him up those rankings lists and up those average fantasy points per week rankings. It wasn't how good he was throughout the whole season. So you can't expect rookie running backs, while they will probably get on the field sooner than a receiver in some cases, you can't expect them to come out there and be their ceiling right away. It just doesn't work like that. So Michael Carter, I'll give him some time here. Hopefully learns the offense, gets some practice under his belt, learns the NFL game, and when he gets in there, he can tear through that spot. And as my flex, maybe even moves up into my RB2 spot if someone goes down. But I really like this Chubb and Akers pairing. There's a lot of upside with that selection there. I think it'll really help this team out. There are some nice receivers still. Not anyone I'm overly high on at this spot. I do like that Rashad Bateman, like I talked about earlier. Laviska Shenault, it's a little shaky. I think he was kind of that gadget piece that now they're bringing in Travis Etienne to do, so I'm not sure I'm overly thrilled about that spot. And I'm actually not sure why this draft board is only 12 rounds. So maybe I'll just not worry about defense in this because that was not supposed to happen. I think I wanted this to be 15 rounds, so that's my bad there. But a little bit of a shorter video for you nonetheless. And don't worry, you'll get your sleeper content. I can make a video designated just to that overall area of fantasy concern. It's probably time we take a quarterback. When I look at the board here, I did fail to address that early on because I think that the value where we were picking here on the board at that 8th spot was at other positions. So Matt Stafford, a player I like. Justin Fields, maybe he won't start week 1, so I don't want to invest in him as my QB1 right here. You could get a Justin Fields, come back and snag Kirk Cousins right there. That's a really low-end QB1, but one who actually puts up those numbers nonetheless on a fairly consistent basis. So Kirk Cousins is a solid option, but I talked about him earlier. Wow. Ryan Tannehill is the selection here. Julio Jones and A.J. Brown. Do I have to say more? He has 2 wide receiver ones on the field, 2 literal, like, if you could perfectly just draw up what a receiver one would look like, it looks like A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. They're huge, big-bodied receivers that run really fast, run really good routes, and win contested catches and are productive down near the red zone. Maybe not so much Julio Jones when you have 3 DBs blanketing you in Atlanta, because that is what eventually happened to him because he was so good. But that probably can't happen anymore when you have an A.J. Brown on the field. So really good situations for both those players. So there, that kind of proved that point. Kirk Cousins is still available here, so if I were to have taken a Justin Fields, playing him for the long haul, again, I don't mind if in the later rounds of these drafts you want to pick some players that have low floors, but you know will produce for you early so that later on a player like a Justin Fields can come in and carry the ship for you. It's a risky investment and it's a long-term play, and you really hope it works out. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll work magically. That's something you could do. Grab that Justin Fields there instead of Ryan Tannehill. If that's your guy, if that's really your guy, I wouldn't do it personally, but maybe if I had waited around and got Justin Fields, we'll see how much longer Kirk sits on the board, but you could do it even with a Matt Ryan, who's still available as well, or Cam Newton could play for you for the first 6 weeks of the season. Fitzmagic, Daniel Jones, really not great and consistent players that you can depend on for the entirety of the season and probably win your leagues with those players in your lineup, but they're serviceable nonetheless, and there's some value to picking them. So we've got our 4 running backs. I like picking Corey Davis here, actually. T.Y. Hilton, he's been regressing. He's in his early 30s now. He's not the same player he once was. Curtis Samuel is sneaky for Washington, but again, I have my concerns. I like Antonio Brown down here. I really do. I think him and Tom Brady have a pretty good connection. Antonio Brown being back in football for 6-ish months. It really wasn't that long, but when you combine the offseason he'll have this year, it won't be game reps, but nonetheless, it'll be valuable reps in some fashion. And I do think Tom Brady will be better in this offense in year 2. We're going to take Corey Davis here, though. Corey Davis could potentially step out as the receiver 1 for the Jets this year. I think Denzel Mims will be fairly productive. He didn't really get much opportunity in his rookie year, but he was able to have some nice, yards per catch with the opportunity he was given. I think Jamison Crowder will still have a somewhat of a role in this offense. And then Elijah Moore, eventually, I think, will be the haymaker, the knockout punch player for this team. And there we go. We can take Antonio Brown with this pick. We'll talk a little bit longer so that we don't run out of time with our last pick, though. Corey Davis is a really underrated player. Very, very good against man coverage. And I think that he was almost masked a little bit because of the Titans' offense, that he was never really able to show what he's supposed to do. I don't think that's the scheme or the offense that he was meant to play in. I just think that a run-first team that wants to hit play-action balls over the top, winning contested grabs is something he can do, but it's probably not his strength. That's more of A.J. Brown-style football. Corey Davis wants to win with routes. He wants to win with getting volume on a play-by-play basis. And he'll make big plays down the field by getting free and getting open with those routes and that speed. So with Zach Wilson, a player who's going to make a lot of improv stuff out of the pocket, that's something that might be really interesting. We'll go AB here in the 11th round. Time to probably start looking at one last reserve. AB, I think, will have some nice touchdown production here. And I think the rest of the mock, they're just going to take defenses here. But since I forgot to extend this mock draft out here, I'll just pick a non-defense for you. I'll give you some extra value, though. If you want to know what defense I would have taken, boom, Washington football team. They're always there. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why the Jets, Eagles, Titans, or Dolphins are the first 4 defenses off the board every time. But they are, and they let Tampa Bay, Washington, San Fran, Pittsburgh even all stay on the board. It's kind of ridiculous. I don't know if it's because people don't, I don't know. I think a lot of people just pick their favorite teams. Maybe this is a popularity contest. I think people just pick their favorite teams for their defense, and that's how that ends up working out. But nonetheless, wow, Tim Tebow is really going up here as the next tight end off the board. That's kind of embarrassing for the fantasy community that he's that high. But anyways, last pick here. Let's see, I've got 1, 2, sorry about that. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 receivers, and I've also got, I have 5 receivers. I have 4 running backs and 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. So I could look at quarterback, tight end, not a tight end I like there, not a Pat Freiermuth guy at all. Anthony Ferkser was a big sleeper of mine before that Julio Jones acquisition because they just didn't have anyone else to throw to. He'll still be a nice tight end, probably a low-end tight end one now with some of those targets being snatched up. Matt Ryan's a nice pick here. Doesn't have Julio Jones anymore. That's been his go-to guy his entire career. But you never know. Him and Kyle Pitts could be the next big thing for the next couple seasons as long as Ryan is a Falcon. Not any quarterbacks I love over any of those other players. I think I like, at the moment, those 4 RBs that I've taken. There's Tevin Coleman, so maybe my last pick here. It is a reach, though, at this spot, and according to ADP, it's a heavy reach. Taking Coleman to handcuff him and pair him with Michael Carter. That's something that would be beneficial since you're going to be playing that rookie anyways and looking for him to eventually break out. So it's a nice strategy, but we'll pass on that. We'll go Matt Ryan here and end this thing off. So Matt Ryan, again, a really nice quarterback. So I didn't draft the defense. Well, that was by design, right? Because we didn't want to pick a defense when I condensed the amount of picks in this draft somehow. So Matt Ryan, again, nice floor, I would say, with the Falcons. The ceiling isn't terribly high anymore. He wasn't very efficient. Like, the passing volume numbers were off the charts last year because of how much they had to throw because they were trailing and they needed to catch up in games. But defenses knew it was coming. They knew Matt Ryan was passing, so he threw a lot more picks than he usually does. He had a lot more incompletions, lower completion percentage. It was an ugly mess in Atlanta, but if you're going to have a guy like a Ryan Tannehill, who, again, is probably a safe floor play with some high upside ceiling now, I really like and he had some really high upside games last year with just Brown and Corey Davis and in his legs. So Tannehill's a really underrated pick here, and that'll do things for today's mock. Alrighty, that'll do it for my latest installment of the 2021 offseason mock draft series. If you enjoyed today's video and haven't done so already, make sure to head down and give this video a like so others like yourself can find it and get the fancy content that they need. Also, go over, check out our social medias. That's how you get added information and alerts when we come out with new content. We've even got some exclusive stuff on there every once in a while. And on that TikTok, Eric does some funny videos as well, so you can get some added humor out of that and a little bit less of a strictly business side of things like I do around here on YouTube most of the time, although we do like to have a good time on those live streams. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure you join the SFS community by subscribing, and we'll see you next time. Peace.